the La Nina forecast improves, and Southern Hemi's swell is coming. I am Mark Sponsler, and welcome to the Stormsurf Video Surf Forecast for the week starting Sunday, June 23rd.
Stormsurf, waves, weather, buoys, altimetry, snow, temperatures, El Nino, weather analysis, essential data for outdoor people, all the time, no hype.
If you haven't subscribed, click the Stormsurf icon down in the lower right-hand corner of your screen. It'll get you signed up for automatic notifications when the videos are posted, typically on Sunday evenings. If you enjoyed the video, give us a thumbs up. If you have any questions, write a comment up down below. And if you'd like to make a small contribution to the cause, you can. Hit the super thanks button down below, the heart with the $sign in it. And with that, I'd like to thank the folks that donated last week. Mont the Drifter, CJA Lady, and then our regular cast of contributors, Tim Caston, Elliot Harris, a bigger contribution by Our Predicament, Imen Etov, sorry if I mispronounced that, and then bigger still from Mark Herlock, and the winner for this week, Evolution Moto. Thank you all very much. Any donation is always appreciated. And with that, let's get to work. We'll start by looking at significant wave heights for the South Pacific Ocean, and we see a pretty calm pattern for the moment. That said, right under New Zealand, there's a small area of 20-foot seas right off the edge of the Ross Ice Shelf. This is Antarctica down here. That is ice. There's New Zealand, Australia. Right here is the area we're going to be watching as we move into the forecast portion of the discussion. But otherwise, a calm pattern is in play. But first, let's take a look at what's going on currently in the ocean. We're going to start by looking at the buoys up in Northern California. Point Sur buoy. This is off of Monterey, the Monterey Peninsula, buoy number 157. We're looking at all the energy that's hitting that buoy. This is considered what they call spectral density. It is just where the energy is focused in the ocean. This chart starts up here on this end, 33.3 second period. This is period here. Long period, super energetic waves, and this would be, if there is a reading, it's the height of the wave in that period band, so 1/10 of a foot at 28.6 seconds. Really nothing. You see a bump here, though, in between the 16.7 and 18.2 second range, almost, looks like top reading's almost 1 foot, but it's actually the accumulation of all this energy under the curve that defines what the pure swell is for any one given storm or one given swell. So we'll look at that in a second. We also see some energy down here in the 8-second range. This chart, or this axis, goes the whole way down to 5 seconds. That's pretty much unrideable wind chop. But we see some what can be defined as wind swell, 8-second period here. So you do some fancy math to try to pull out the primary and secondary swell. You can see it right up here. This is the summary for this buoy updates every half hour. So primary swell, 5.2 feet at 7.9 seconds from 322 degrees. That would make surf at 4 feet, but that's probably a bit on the high side. Yeah, there's some waist to chest high surf at top north-facing breaks. Secondary swell, 1.3 feet at 17.2 seconds from 188 degrees. This is the new incoming Southern Hemi swell, produced about a week ago. Surf from that, theoretically 2.3 feet. In Santa Cruz, surf is not that big, but down in Southern California, well, we'll look at the buoy there in a minute, and we'll have that discussion. And then there's significant wave height. Most people like to quote that from the buoys, but that is, we had this discussion, I think, last week in last week's video. This is the accumulation of all energy starting up at 33 seconds and going the whole way down to like 1 second. So it's not a good surf indicator. Now, we tweaked it here, this significant wave height. We made it for 5 seconds plus. But normally, if you go to any of the NOAA sites, they account for all energy in the ocean. We just threw out the wind chop and say, because we're focused on surfing. Normally, significant wave height is for boaters, and they want to know what's, if you have a bunch of chop all accumulating together and piling up for one instantaneous second, what's the biggest 1/3 of waves they would experience during that last reading period? This is really surf-wise, you're not going to see 6 feet at 8.3 seconds, but at least it's some an homage to the way Noah used to do it. Surfers are interested in swell. Swell is what generates waves, and that's what you ride. And typically, swell or wind swell, 5 seconds, really 6 seconds or greater. All right, let's go take a look down south. Then we go down to Southern California, the Point Loma South buoy. This is off of San Diego, buoy 191. Same profile, but look at this. A bigger, much bigger peak in the 16.7 second range. Is this really that much bigger? We'll take a look here in a second, but you see none of the wind swell. So then you can go down here. So this graph here shows you just the surf height from primary and secondary swell all sort of lumped together. You see a slight upward trend here, but we're going down to the very last reading. It's a long sort of table here, but here we go. Here's 2.5 feet at 16.8 seconds. That was that half hour before. It was only 1.2 at 17.6 seconds and 2.2 at 16. So you see, and you can kind of go back in time, or you can see when the swell says 1.2 at 18 seconds. This was last night. That would be Saturday night. But you see there was even energy trying to sneak in before that late on Saturday afternoon. Anyway, if you really want to geek out and pick through all this, you can. But the point being, this big reading up here is a single, probably literally a single set that hit that buoy. Bigger than all the others. Actual swell height is probably something less. But anyway, we'll do the analysis. Primary swell, 2.5 feet at 16.8 seconds from 189 degrees. Now, this says 1.9, but remember, we're accounting for this, the energy off on the shoulders of the peak as well, because that literally is part of the swell. And then our secondary swell, 1.4 feet at 13.4 seconds from 187 degrees, and that'd be surf height of 1.9 feet. Oh yeah, and this primary swell, 4.1 feet. Yeah, I did see some sets that were, shoulder high or so down south at top breaks that magnify and have swell enhancing bathymetry. So a valid reading. And then we go over to Lanai, buoy number 239. This is again another southern hemi swell indicator. We see much less energy, somewhere in the 13 to 14 second period range. There's a reason for that. We will talk about that in a minute as well. Primary swell, 1.3 feet at 12.7 seconds from 181 degrees. That's 1.7 foot surf. And secondary swell, 0.6 of a foot at 15.9 seconds from that's all pretty much this same lump of energy. It just got sort of pulled out separately here, but really we're talking maybe 2 foot surf. All right, so what's going on? Where'd this swell come from? Well, starting on Saturday, the 15th of June, about a week and a day ago, a gale started developing the South Central Pacific. New Zealand here, Australia, Ross Ice Shelf, Chile, Peru, you get the general idea. You can see this is significant wave height. So by 18Z on Saturday, it was like 11 a.m. in the morning last Saturday. We had a little area of 28.4 foot seas. These are the highest seas over this entire domain. Also notice there was a gale in the Tasman Sea that pushed some energy north as well. If you pick around on YouTube, I believe there is some video of that swell hitting various locations. Anyway, the main event for California, what happened about 11 p.m. on Saturday night, the 15th of June, with seas at 33.3 feet, aimed pretty well off to the north, and then this system faded from there. This is the swell that is starting to hit California now. Now, in regards to Hawaii, Hawaii is about, we'll say Oahu's about 158 west, so right here, if you kept going up into the northern hemisphere, you see most of the energy was east of their cutoff and aimed northeast. There is small little sideband energy radiating into Hawaii, but really, this sort of, I don't want to say proves the point, but illustrates the point that the fetch needs to be aimed directly at you, and once you get off more than maybe 30 degrees of the main axis, size rapidly drops off. Think of this as almost like a gun shooting a bullet, and we'll use buckshot in this case, because it does spread. There is directional spreading, but it doesn't spread as wide as you think. The storm needs to be lifting north and aim directly at your beach to get maximum size. So the last swell really did great in Hawaii, not so great in California. This one, it's not going to do great for California, but at least it will make some waves. And for Hawaii, sideband background swell is probably all we're going to see. All right, so let's put this into motion. As we got into Sunday a week ago, this system faded out, and that was pretty much it. We're just going to blast through this just to see if there's anything else of interest. So you see this tiny little fetch with like 26-foot seas. This was on Thursday, a couple days ago. And then it kind of maybe got to 30 feet, but it's so small and basically moving off to the east-northeast. Really doubtful much, if anything meaningful, is going to show. You really want a large fetch area with high seas aimed in your direction for a long period of time to generate swell. And this was basically like dropping a pebble into a pond versus dropping a boulder into a pond. So doubtful we're going to see a whole lot from that. So that's on Friday the 21st. We're into Saturday, so just yesterday. And not a whole lot going on, though. This area over here is now where we're going to start watching. Let's see, we got to right there and right this area here, but let's keep going before we get into all that. And this might seem kind of weird, but we're going to go look at the northern hemisphere because, well, it's June 22nd. We're going back a couple days, Wednesday the 19th. Just look at this. Not that any surf's coming from it, but you can just see this pattern. 1, 2, 3 gales. Not gales, low pressure system, let's call them. And here we are today, traversing the North Pacific. These are remnants from El Nino. Our El Nino, we did the deep dive dissection last week. Yeah, it wasn't great. It wasn't nearly as good as what we had hoped it would be. Really, the PDO kind of stepped on all that. If you don't understand this, go watch last week's video, starting, maybe 10 minutes into the video or something like that, and you get all the deep analysis of what this past El Nino was and what it wasn't and why it wasn't what we had hoped that it would be. That said, still, there was an El Nino, and still it is affecting the jet stream and creating low-pressure systems, even in late June, traversing the North Pacific. All right, so let's go take a look at the forecast now. What's coming for the next week? We know there is swell starting to hit California, but is there more beyond that? Well, the video title kind of teases at that, so let's discuss further. We'll start by looking at jet stream level winds. These winds up about 30,000 feet help support the formation of gales. When those gales form, help direct their track. We're looking for a trough, a push in the jet to the north. Well, we don't see that. In fact, here's the northern branch of the jet, and if anything, it's falling south. Here's the good one, the influential southern branch of the jet. The Ross Ice Shelf is somewhere around 63 right now, so right there. So the jet's pretty much moving over the Ross Ice Shelf, not doing anything over ice-free waters. And we have this big gap in between that typically supports high pressure and does nothing for generating storms in our forecast location. But notice as we get into Monday, tomorrow, the jet does start to lift a little bit to the north and starting just southeast of New Zealand, the whole way across the central South Pacific. Now, not raging or anything. Winds are, 120 to maybe 130 knots. But there you go. There is what we known as a trough. The jet pushing to the north. That helps create a clockwise flow aloft, like an eddy, up high at jet stream level at 30,000 feet, but also down at the ocean surface. That is the hallmark of low pressure. And of course, low pressure, if it's strong enough, generates winds. Those winds get traction on the ocean surface and generate seas. Seas, as they migrate or radiate away from the fetch area, get groomed out and eventually turn into swell. Swell, when it hits your beach, turns into surf. All right, so we have a trough forecast, and it's within the 72-hour window, so it's pretty likely that it will happen. And it pushes a bit to the north into Wednesday night and Thursday, and then finally fades out as we get into Friday. Beyond that, let's see if we have, well, there is another weak trough, but not a lot of wind pushing up into it, and it's outside of the Southern California swell window. Maybe something for Chile and Peru, but probably not. And then we get into a week out. Notice a bit of troughiness, not a full-on trough, but I'll just call it a weak troughing pattern. Tries to set up under New Zealand. We talked about this before. During the summer after an El Nino winter in the northern hemisphere, the area that tends to be most favorable for storm production in the southern hemi is this area right under New Zealand, which that has been the name of the game this entire summer, other than this one storm that just recently formed in the South Central Pacific. Some friends of mine were that view down in Chile and Peru were reporting, yeah, it's been a pretty bad summer there, and I'm sort of thinking, well, for California it's been okay, not counting all the wind swell that has marred whatever swell there's been north of Point Conception, and Hawaii has done pretty well as well. But it is not unusual for the New Zealand storm corridor to be active the summer after an El Nino. Now, during La Nina summers, the main focus tends to be in the Southeast Pacific, really focusing on Chile, Peru, and we'll say, down into or up into Southern California. But Northern California really favors those New Zealand angled swells. And just for fun, what is the forecast for the North Pacific from the Jetstream level? And here's our Jetstream. We'll just put this into motion. We're into Monday, Tuesday. I mean, if this was, I think I said this a week or two ago, if this was the Jetstream for September, I'd be going, oh, this looks great. This looks like fall is starting. But what we really have is a continuation from the El Nino winter. It's still influencing the Jetstream, and the expectation is this influence is expected to continue probably into, now it's not going to push the jet as far south as we get into the fall, this coming fall. We're still months out from that. But there will be more energy in the jet stream. It'll probably be northward displaced because of a building La Nina pattern. But there still will be energy in the jet stream, and the jet stream will be influenced by the remnants of El Nino, perhaps even into late December, maybe even January. Hard to say. Something to keep our eyes on. All right, so let's go back down south. Let's get grounded in reality. What's coming for the next week? We're looking at surface level pressure, surface level winds. We know there's a broad trough supposed to set up in the South Pacific. And sure enough, here we go on Sunday evening. So that's basically right now as we're recording. Low pressure developing right on the hairy edge of the Ross Ice Shelf with 45 knot westerly winds lifting to the east-northeast, down to 40 knots by Monday morning. This is probably more of a primer gale. It'll serve to rough up the ocean surface just enough so that if there were another gale that could come behind it, it doesn't have to start from dead zero. There's already lump in the ocean. If you start blowing more wind on that roughed up sea state, the wind gets traction much better and can more easily generate swell. So as we get into Monday night and Tuesday, the first gale fades out, second gale starts developing with 45 knot southwest winds. Look at this broad area fetch at 40 to 45 knots in pockets. Again, benefiting from the roughed up ocean surface. That continues as we get into Wednesday, lifting to the northeast and southwest winds here. So that gets us into Wednesday. Then the gale fades out on Thursday. Now we have additional fetch here, but it's only in the 30, 35 knot range. That's good for 13-second period swell, and that just doesn't have enough energy to make it will decay to almost nothing by the time it reaches up into California. So nothing there. Now here we see a gale forecast on Friday night, the 28th of June, with 45 to 50 knot winds. Looks like it's probably over Antarctic ice. We'll have to see, but not bad. Maybe targeting Chile and Peru. And that fades out, and then you get some sense of fetch. We know there's a trough trying to set up here over in the far southwest Pacific, but wind just really not that strong. So probably nothing from that. All right, let's go look at the effect of those winds on the ocean surface. Here we go, significant wave heights for the South Pacific Ocean, New Zealand right there. And sure enough, here we go, right as we speak. 26-foot seas being generated south of New Zealand. This, again, is the primer gale. 30-foot seas forecast 6 hours from now, fading back down to 29.9 feet. Again, the highest seas over this entire domain. And then fading as it pushes east. Now, this in and of itself can generate swell, and probably will in the 15 to 16 second period range, but the second gale is the one that will benefit the most because it already has a 25-foot sea state to start acting on. Bingo, here you go. 32-foot seas, 35-foot seas, where is that? Oh, over here, that tiny little area. So let's say 33-foot seas, effectively. Again, 33-foot seas. Again, 33-foot seas. I mean, and over a pretty broad area. So this looks, we're within the 72-hour window. This looks like, for sure, some sort of swell-producing system. We'll have to keep our eyes on that. And then another little system. Here's that gale forecast for the far southeast Pacific. So Southern California is at 118 west right here. Northern California at 122. So this is pretty much outside of the swell window. But this two little systems, both forecast aimed at Southern California, but more so at Chile and Peru. So a little bit of hope for them, while some sort of fetch tries to develop under New Zealand, but really doesn't do a whole lot. So one more gale of real interest on the charts for the next week. And then just for laughs, the Northern Hemi. Well, let's go take a look. We know the jet's going. We know there's supposed to be some sort of activity. Yes, low pressure producing 14-foot seas or something like that. No swell expected. And then the pattern pretty much fades out from there. All right, local wind forecast. This has just been the bane of our existence this entire summer north of Point Conception. Typically, during an El Nino winter, it lowers pressure in the North Pacific in general over the entire North Pacific, and then that would in turn reduce the prevalence of the springtime pressure gradient and high pressure building along the coast. This year, that has not happened. Now, it's not been blowing that super hard from Monterey southward, but from Monterey Bay northward, it's just been continuous north winds, but it didn't start till really late in the season. I think it was like somewhere the first or second week of May, the wind machine really fired up. Normally, it's like March when it starts. So it fired up in May, and it's been going nonstop. The net result, a lot of upwelling along the coast. Off of Point Reyes, which would be right here, water temperatures are still 49 degrees. It's that way, even 48 degrees up into Northern California. NOAA even issued a hypothermia alert for bathers going into the ocean up in Northern California. Like it's always so balmy there that, a couple of degrees difference, you need to be aware of it. Well, couple of degrees does mean 49 degrees in June is cold, all attributable to high pressure, stronger than normal high pressure than one would expect given that we're coming out of El Nino, but it's there nonetheless. Again, speaking to the PDO and just the lack of momentum that this past El Nino had. So anyway, Sunday, here we go, northwest winds, 20 to 25 knots out of the north. From, we'll say, Point Reyes northward. Trades, 15-plus knots for the Hawaiian Islands. We get into Monday, pretty much the same pattern. So we get into Tuesday, high pressure looks to be fading. Northwest winds weaker, maybe just 15 knots. And trades, 15 knots for the Hawaiian Islands. Wednesday, a reasonable northwest wind pattern, probably seasonal, maybe a little bit stronger, but not too bad for California, and trades for the Hawaiian Islands, 15 knots. Thursday, here comes the gradient again. Here's your high pressure right here. Wind circulating clockwise around it, starting to bump up against the coast. Heat low inland, tightens up the isobars, creating the gradient, creating northwest winds, and here we are by Thursday afternoon. 20 to 25 knot northwest winds from Point Conception the whole way north, and we're right back to where we were. Trades relatively light for the Hawaiian Islands Friday. Now the gradient does lift north on Friday, which is good. At least it keeps it focused up there, producing wind swell down south of Point Reyes, and winds not so bad. Trades light for the Hawaiian Islands Saturday. Well, notice here's 1, 2 low pressure systems sort of cutting in. See, cutting the hide, pushing it down a little bit, reducing the gradient some. And then we're into Sunday, a lighter wind regime. But my guess is in a day or two out as the high pressure surges to the east. Notice actually the gradient already building south of Monterey Bay, and as the high pressure builds, so will the winds along the coast. So we are still in what one would call the springtime northwest wind and wind swell regime, delayed this year because of El Nino, but here it is. This is like in effect delaying the start of real summertime conditions relative to the coast from Point Conception northward. All right, so the surf spot forecast. We're just going to we'll take a look at Santa Cruz. We're seeing this is just surf height in feet, 3 feet building to 4 feet on Monday. I'll just spoil the surprise right now. Most of all of this is wind swell the whole way across the chart. The winds, these are wind speeds and wind directions. Not so bad, but this is all because the wind is north of Point Reyes and it's generating wind swell, and it's burying the southern hemiswell. In fact, we'll look down here, swell height, 3 feet at 9 to 10 seconds. You see little bits of the southern hemiswell. We know southern hemiswell. We just looked at the buoy. It's hitting California and Santa Cruz right now. Not big, but it's there. But it gets masked by all the wind swell. The wind swell is the primary swell. The southern hemiswell is the secondary swell. Then you see again another southern hemiswell starting to hit next weekend, but it again is masked. But let's go look at Southern California. We'll go down to Dana Point. This is a much more realistic representation of what's going on because the Channel Islands block all the wind swell, and Point Conception sort of sticks out there and blocks wind. So surf height's 2.5 feet. This does not include bathymetric enhancement, so you know it's going to be 1.5 times bigger at top swell enhancing breaks. I'm not mentioning any names, but you see the pattern. And swell heading down. Let's go look at actual swell heights. 1.8 feet at 15 seconds on Monday. And then in the 2-foot range at 14 seconds on Tuesday. And then slowly working its way down. And then perhaps, well, you see bits and pieces of 15-second, 14-second energy next week. And there's probably a little bit of background southern hemiswell going to come in about that time as well. And then finally over to the south shore of Oahu, surf heights in the 2-foot range, building to 3.5 feet and then fading down. Here's your trades at 20 knots, fading to the 15 and 18 knot range. I mean, pretty much seasonal sort of wind pattern. But here, your swell, 1.8 feet at 13 seconds. So that is the same southern hemiswell that's building in California. The swell height pretty much hold as the period just dribbles down to 11 seconds. And even smaller. And then another little shot of background southern hemiswell, 2.5 feet at 13 seconds sort of thing, and then slowly fading. So that will provide some swell for late in the work week into the following weekend in Oahu and south-facing shores of the Hawaiian Islands. So let's go look long-term. What's going on with the MJO and ENSO? The MJO, the Madden-Julian Oscillation, and ENSO, the El Nino Southern Oscillation. These two weather oscillations are the major influencers of weather and the Jetstream and for swell production, both in the winter and in the summer, though stronger in the winter in the northern hemisphere. We'll start with the MJO discussion, the Madden-Julian Oscillation. There are 2 phases to the MJO, the active and the inactive phase. The active phase is our friend. It is like a low-pressure system. The inactive phase is not our friend. It is like a high-pressure system. The MJO travels from west to east on the equator. So the active phase is on one side of the planet, the inactive phase on the other. They rotate around the planet from west to east. When the active phase of the MJO moves on the equator into the West Pacific, it takes warm, moist air that's down at the ocean surface, starts lifting it aloft because it is a low pressure system. It like vacuums up that warm, moist air, imparts it way up into the atmosphere, up at jet stream level. That in turn gets sucked into the jet stream, energizes the jet stream both in the northern hemisphere and the southern hemisphere, and then helps create those troughs, which help create storms, which help create seas, which create swell. You know the drill. So the active phase is good for storm production. The inactive phase is a high pressure system. It creates sinking air. It cuts off the supply of warm, moist air to the jet stream, weakening the jet, causing it to split, and then does nothing or not as much to help support storm formation. So, first off, we're going to look for signs of the active phase of the MJO, because that is the one we're interested in. All right, we're going to start by looking at trade winds across the Pacific. This is the East Pacific here, West Pacific here. This is the equator. We're only looking 5 degrees north and south of the equator. The active phase of the MJO, because it's a low pressure system, it dampens trade winds. Trade winds are generated by high pressure. The inactive phase of the MJO creates stronger high pressure, creates stronger trades, and so we don't want to see strong trades. We want to see weak trades, or we want to see trades reverse direction across the equatorial Pacific. That would be a sign of the active phase of the MJO. So let's do our inspection here. This is data from the TAO buoy array, a series of buoys strung across the equator, used for monitoring El Nino, but they have wind sensors on them. These are 5-day average winds. Okay, we're just looking. We're looking at the arrows, pretty long arrows. That means pretty strong trades over the East Pacific. There's the date line right there. Pretty strong trades over the date line, pretty strong trades over the West Pacific. So this kind of does not look like the active phase of the MJO. It looks more like the inactive phase. But let's dig a little deeper. Anomalies. This is the wind speed anomalies. Are they stronger or weaker than normal? If the active phase of the MJO is in control, it would tend to dampen trade winds. That means we would see negative anomalies. If the inactive phase is in control, it would build more high pressure and it would strengthen trades. So looking here over the East Pacific, we're just 5 degrees north and 5 degrees south of the equator. That's where all this influence happens with the MJO. We're just looking, well, we see pretty long arrows over here, but just a little baby arrow there. So maybe a little bit stronger than normal trades in the East Pacific. Over the Central Pacific, dead neutral. Okay, that says neither active nor inactive, just sort of nothing. Same thing over the West Pacific. So we're not in raging inactive phase of the MJO according to this. We're just kind of neutral. Not too bad. Let's keep going. All right, what is the forecast for the next 2 weeks? This is data from the GFS model. This is the standard global, NOAA's main global weather model. We're looking again, 850 millibar zonal wind anomalies. Are the winds stronger out of the east, represented in blue, or stronger out of the west in reds and oranges? Out of the west would be the active phase, the good phase of the MJO. The blues, the inactive phase. So you can see, but this is the whole planet on one chart. We do see the date line, 180 west, right down the middle of the chart. Far West Pacific starts at about 125 east, so right there. You can almost see a seam in the data. So where the magic happens, I call it the Kelvin wave generation area. It's in the West Pacific to just a point from as soon as you get as far west in the West Pacific as you can get to the date line, and maybe just a little bit east of there to maybe 170 west. All right, so you can see we had massive easterly anomalies in that area back in late May. In June, things just sort of went neutral, mixture of west and east anomalies. Here we are today, mainly east anomalies. The last little bit of west anomalies look like they're drifting off to the east. And here we go, a big push of easterly anomalies for the next, these are 5-day increments, so for about the next week. So this looks like the inactive phase of the MJO, and you can literally see it moving from west to east across here. And then starting about the 1st of July, looks like the active phase of the MJO is coming with westerly anomalies. So we suffer for a week or so. That said, we still have storms forecast on the chart. The MJO does not, the inactive phase of the MJO does not preclude the formation of storms. It just sort of gives, if you're in the active phase, it gives extra spice to the storms and a little bit extra energy. So right now, I would say this is not a sweet spot for storm development. That said, we know there is swell coming and there is more forecast. but maybe a sweeter spot might be as we get into the early part of July. Let's keep going. So we look at other models, we look at other data, because to get all your information from one source and believe that's probably not a good idea. There are the models, like people, have different opinions, and it's always good to get secondary and third opinions to see if what you're planning to do makes any sense. In this case, we're trying to get a sense of what's going on with the MJO. So this is data from the CA model. It's a statistic model. The GFS model, the one we were just looking at, is a dynamic model. So two different models. The statistic model, so this shows areas favorable for precipitation, dry or not favorable. Wet air versus dry air. Why does that matter? Well, the active phase of the MJO, if it takes warm, moist air and lifts it aloft, that warm, moist air eventually has to condense and create clouds. That's what this model is showing. The blues are cloudy areas, the reds are dry areas. High pressure versus low pressure. So today, South America, Central America, Hawaii, the equator there, dateline right there, New Guinea there. The Kelvin wave dateline right there. The main area we're interested in is right here. Dead neutral today. Basically dead neutral 5 days from now, 10 days from now, 15 days from now. So no MJO forecast. Now the GEFS model, the dynamic model, says, well, maybe weekly inactive 5 days from now, sort of like what the GFS was saying on that model we looked at. But then as we get 2 weeks out from now, here comes the active phase of the MJO with this more clouds building, lower pressure building in the West Pacific. On average, not a single low pressure system, but just a general tendency towards lower pressure, or literally a tendency towards cloudier skies, which one then can infer means lower pressure, which means the active phase of the MJO. All right, let's keep digging. Phase diagrams for the same two models. Statistic model here, dynamic model here. What do these diagrams mean? They're just showing you where the active phase of the MJO is and where it has been, and where it's forecast to be and how strong it is. All right? So where is the heavy dot? Right there. Start. Right there. That's where the active phase of the MJO is now. How do you read this? Well, the MJO moves west-east from the Indian Ocean to the Maritime Continent. That's like Bali, to the West Pacific, to the East Pacific, under the United States, over Africa, and then back to the Indian Ocean. All right, so the active phase is like over Africa or almost in the Indian Ocean. If it's inside this circle, it's considered so weak as to be almost not discernible. And the forecast track, you can see it sort of wiggling around somewhere in here, just basically says no change at all. This is per the statistic models. While the dynamic model over here says, well, the active phase actually moving through the Indian Ocean to the Maritime Continent and getting stronger. Not strong. This is anything inside the circle is like almost non-existent. So very weak, but moving into the Maritime Continent 2 weeks from now. So that makes sense. Let's see, where were we? I think it was, yes, down here. So the statistic model shows nothing because the active phase is like steady over in this area and very weak, where the dynamic model shows, oh, there's the Maritime Continent. There's the active phase trying to start moving into the West Pacific 2 weeks from now, right about there. Okay, well, maybe that's pushing it a little bit. It's in the Maritime Continent. Still has a ways to go to reach the West Pacific, but it looks, at least for the moment, somewhat more favorable. Let's keep going. Here is another statistic model. This is upper level moisture. All right, it's about a week ahead of what goes on at the surface. Greens are areas favorable for precipitation. Oranges, dry air, not favorable for precipitation. This goes out 40 days, 5 days for each panel. South America, Central America, 0 is the equator. Dateline roughly there. There's New Guinea. Okay, Kelvin wave generation area right there. The greens are wet air. So you get, there's your active phase. Really, it's over the Indian Ocean. 5 days from now, 10 days from now, July 3rd, there you see it, even per the statistic model, trying to push into the West Pacific, making its way across into about, somewhere into the middle of July, the 13th to the 18th. And then you see dry air coming and a less favorable pattern. So if there were a period for swell production, I would say somewhere in the early part of July to mid-July looks like the next good opportunity for maybe a little bit of added fuel to the Jetstream and to the storm production machine. Then we go to the CFS model. This goes out 1 month. All right, same deal. The blues, easterly anomalies, inactive phase. The reds, westerly anomalies, the active phase. All right, the forecast begins here. Again, the date line running right up the middle. West Pacific Kelvin wave generation area starts right about here, going the whole way down the chart to about 170 west to here. All right, now this actually shows you the MJO. And you get the sense just by looking at this, well, the dotted is the inactive phase, the solid is the active phase. And you get the sense of a very weak MJO pattern has been in play now for quite a while. Here we are, June 22nd, dotted with the easterly anomalies. This is the inactive phase of the MJO. And then you see westerly anomalies developing, what's that, July 3rd, something like that. And here is a weak sense of the active phase trying to traverse the Pacific, but even at that, there are easterly anomalies embedded in it, and then westerly anomalies moving into the West Pacific, south of California, towards the end of July. Let's go one step further. This is the same model, the CFS model, but it goes out 3 months. The forecast is up here. What has been occurring is down here. The reds or actually yellows and oranges are westerly anomalies, so the active phase traversing, date line right up the middle, same deal. Kelvin wave generation, West Pacific starts at 125 east, so the whole way up. So here was an active phase, the MJO. This looks like another one here. This looks like another one here. Looks like another one coming right here, 1st of July, let's say. And then something also happening in August. Now, I don't believe a model a week out, much less 3 months out, but this model has been amazingly consistent. But what it is also showing is this building easterly wind pattern, not in the Kelvin wave generation area yet, but come about mid-July, you see it progressively building further and further to the west, making it to, just eyeballing this, almost filling, well, it's interesting, because last time we did this, it made it halfway through the Kelvin wave generation area, which would be there. Now it's backtracking a little bit. Keep that in mind, because there's a little bit of interesting data that's starting to creep into the models, and it's all in our favor. All right, let's overlay the MJO here. Let's not get sidetracked. All right, here's our inactive phase of the MJO. It shows it coming, doing business through about July 3rd, but even with westerly anomalies building before that. Then our active phase, July 3rd into about July 18th or so. Here is our next spot for swell production. Inactive phase behind that, and see these inactive phases are getting stronger and the active phase is getting weaker. That would explain the easterly anomalies building progressively over more of the Pacific. Then here's our next big active phase forecast sometime in August, and pretty much the whole way through August into September. We'll see how that develops. All right, low pass filter. This is the low pressure, high pressure bias thing. Solid contours, low pressure bias. El Nino, the low pressure bias. Not a single low-pressure system, but the tendency for multiple low-pressure systems to form right over the date line, classic El Nino pattern. Here is the dotted contour. The high-pressure bias now building over the exact same area that was dominated by low-pressure last winter, and you see it by about June 9th here, building, expanding, filling the entire eastern, almost the western Pacific to, what's that? Again, about 150 west or 150 east. So pretty much the entire Pacific covered by easterly anomalies and the high pressure, low pressure bias setting up over the Indian Ocean. This is classic La Nina pattern. No real change. All right, so now we get into the El Nino La Nina ENSO part of the discussion. We're going to start by looking at subsurface water temperature anomalies, the balance of temperature. During El Nino, warm water piles up in the East Pacific driven by weaker than normal trades, actually westerly anomalies. During La Nina, All the warm water piles up in the East Pacific, driven by stronger than normal trades. That would mean more high pressure on average in the Pacific. We clearly see that pattern play. The 30-degree centigrade isotherm line unchanged from where it's been for the past 2 or 3 weeks at 180 west. 29 degrees Celsius isotherm at 165 unchanged. Now here's where things are a little interesting. The 28-degree isotherm at one point was like at 150, and it backtracked to 140. Now it's the whole way to 120, suggesting that warm water is actually building in the West Pacific. That infers that easterly trades are not as strong as they had been, allowing the sun to start beating on the ocean surface here and warming it up some. The 24-degree isotherm still holding about where it's been, 25 meters deep, which isn't very deep. During the peak of El Nino, the 24-degree isotherm was down at, I think, down to 65 at 165 meters down. So much less volume of warm water in the East Pacific. But it is not the means, it is the anomalies. Difference from normal for this time of year. Whoa, what is this? A big ball of 1, 2, 3 degrees centigrade anomalies above normal, putting a cap on upwelling, supposedly, of cool water, the La Nina cool pool, being held at bay, at least according to this, and that's probably driven by these sensors. So see these X's here. These are the anchor lines on the TAO buoys. The X's are sensors. There's only one sensor for this entire area. Well, 2 sensors right there. Oh, and there's actually a couple hanging off here. My guess is, and these other sensors, see, they're down here, and there probably should be some here. There's buoy problems going on. They got 1 or 2 sensors that are picking up warm temperatures here, and so the model fills in the gap between the sensors. Goes, there's piles of warm water building up here. I don't know. I'm not buying it. Let's go look at another data source. All right, here is another set of data. It's actually using those same sensors, but then it also uses satellite data to measure the height of the ocean surface, or actually the variance from normal, the height. We'll get into that in a minute. But the short of it, what it says is, yeah, those sensors might say that there's warm water here, but we're not seeing any of it, and this is probably closer to right. So cold water. That said, it still has this warm pool at going to about 135 west, whereas previous iterations of it had it all just way sequestered in the West Pacific. So there is something going on, not as dramatic as what this suggests, but still a good amount of warm water over the West and Central Pacific. But the cool pool, the La Nina cool pool, clearly still in play. Sea level anomalies. All right, so here's what I was talking about earlier. Satellite, polar orbiting satellite. Here's the Earth. The satellite rotates just around like this. Well, actually, it'll do it like this. It rotates around like this, and the Earth rotates underneath the satellite. You know, the satellite makes one pass around the Earth every 90 minutes. The Earth rotates just a little bit at a time. Over a period of about a week or 10 days, you get a complete mapping of the entire surface of the planet, and the sensors we're looking at measure significant wave height. But with that, and if you know what the sphere of the ocean is normally, you can take out the wave heights, take out the wind wave heights, take out the tides, and you get a sense of, is the sphere of the ocean higher or lower than normal? Why would you care about that? Well, if the sphere of the ocean is lower normal, if you have cold water depth by default, it contracts, and that'll create a divot on the ocean surface. Warm water at depth expands, it displaces water above it and creates a bump on the ocean surface. So if you have dips, one can infer there's cold water at depth. So here's the equator, here's the date line. It's kind of a weird looking chart, but that's Chile, Peru. There's the Galapagos, that little squiggle there, that's Ecuador. Central America, there's Yucatan, you got that, Hawaii there. There's the date line. Here's New Guinea out here. This clearly shows -5, -10, -15 centimeter anomalies. I don't know if I can actually pull that up here. 15 centimeters is not very much. It is that much. Not a whole lot. What's that? 6 inches. Okay, so if the ocean is lower than normal, 6 inches here, then we know, or one can assume, there's cold water at depth, which means that first chart we looked at, it showed the warming, a building warm pool there is just nonsense. It's a sensor issue. Bad with the buoys. This shows a clear La Nina pattern in play, and all your warm water is off here, and it isn't even that much. And all we care about, again, 5 degrees north and south of the equator. Right, let's move on. Upper ocean heat anomalies for the past year. West Pacific here, East Pacific here, oranges and reds, warmer than normal temperatures, blues, colder than normal temperatures. Last week's video discussed all the active phases of the MJO, Kelvin wave production. I'm not going to go into all that here, but this right here was the last Kelvin wave, warm water pushed to the east, driven by the active phase of the MJO. This was in December, January of 2024. And then after that, nothing but cold water and colder water building. Now, here's the interesting part, and I don't know that it really statistically makes any difference, but here's our building warm pool. You notice that the cool pool is pushing off to the east and warming temperatures are building. Now, my guess is then when we get the next inactive phase of the MJO, it will start feeding easterly anomalies, creating more upwelling, and this warm water will disappear here. You notice, you can see it here. A cold water Kelvin wave, a warm water Kelvin wave that really goes nowhere. It's really not even a warm water Kelvin wave. It's just a dampening of the trade winds. Trade winds again fire up March, April, May, and now they're fading, and here comes, this is just surface, it's depth warming, but it's not a Kelvin wave per se. So we'll see how this pattern plays out as we get into the next couple of months, but I'm not super hopeful that we're getting like a wholesale warming pattern. That said, there is data that we're going to get into in a second that maybe contradicts that slightly. Sea surface temperature anomalies. Is the ocean surface on the equator 5 degrees now north and south of the equator warmer or colder than normal for the past couple of days? Well, there is Chile, Peru, Ecuador, the Galapagos there. You see blues, colder than normal waters, pushing along, driven by stronger than normal trades, and we know there's a massive cool pool subsurface all erupting, lingering warm temperatures from the remnants of El Nino, but right on the equator. And again, 5 degrees north and south of the equator. That's 20 degrees north and south. So we're talking just this thin little sliver from there down to about there. And you see this building area of cool. Now, this is the Nino 1.2 region here, right by Ecuador and the Galapagos. Nino 3.4 starts at 120 west and goes out to 170 west, so out in here. That's the official El Nino monitoring region. We'll get into that in a minute. But you get the sense that cooler water is building and trying to stab its way into the heart of the last residuals of El Nino at the ocean surface. All right, here we go. Here's the trend for the past 7 days. And, you need more than 7 days for a trend, but it just gives you a general sense. Cooling along Ecuador, the Galapagos, out to a point south of California. This is all the Nino 1.2 region. And you see a definite cooling trend here. Little pockets of warming, but in general, cooling. And even out here, pretty much neutral. I mean, it's warming sort of, but not really. It's just basically neutral. The backed off view, giving us the same picture. Developing cool pool, the start of La Nina, emerging off of Ecuador. The Nino 1.2 index. So here's temperatures in the Nino 1.2 region. That area right there by the Galapagos off of Ecuador. You can see temperatures heading down, but since about May 15th, they really haven't, they bounce up and down. Today's value, minus 1.173 degrees, so a degree and 173 thousandths. Yes, definitely in La Nina territory, but this is not the official El Nino monitoring region. This is sort of like the early warning sign. It sort of almost seems like it's bottomed out at about 1 degree, at least for now. We go to the Nino 3.4 index. This is the official El Nino monitoring region. Again, 5 degrees north and south of the equator, from a point south of California out to about the dateline. Temperatures plus 47 thousandths of a degree above normal. Now, this is not the official index. Actually, temperatures are a little bit warmer than what this index says, but this gives you a sense of the trend. You can see we had back in March El Nino temperatures slowly fading, hitting almost neutral about mid-May, and then have just been toggling right at dead even since then. It's a mixture of that thin little cool pool, and then the residual El Nino warmer water wrapped around it in all dimensions. They're in a struggle who's going to win. I mean, all the models, we know where they're going already, but the question is, we're kind of at that point in time where we thought it would be evolving a bit quicker, at least the models did a couple of months ago. We're out of the spring unpredictability barrier, but let's hold on to that thought for a minute. Next up, sea surface temperature anomalies, weekly anomalies. This is the official OISST record. This is Nino 1.2 region, Nino 3, Nino 4. This is the Nino 3.4 region, the official El Nino monitoring region. Temperatures as of the 12th of June, the week of June the 12th, dead even. You can see as we go back in time here, we got a peak reading on November 22nd right here of 2.1 degrees for a weekly reading, but now we are dead neutral, neither El Nino nor La Nina, completely neutral. What does the atmosphere think is going on? Well, we look at the Southern Oscillation Index, the difference in pressure between Darwin, Australia, and Tahiti. Tahiti in the Pacific Ocean, Darwin in the Indian Ocean, roughly. When pressure is lower in Tahiti, that is a good indicator that pressure in general is lower in the Pacific. Look at this, minus 26.22. So pressure lower today and has been 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 days is really not a trend. Let's just slide back and look and see. Well, we did have a pretty good negative run here back in the early part of June. It's been toggling all over the place. Hard to see the trees from the forest, so we look at the 30-day average. Sort of smooths out some of the bumps. The value minus 5, suggesting lower pressure just barely in the Pacific. Let's go back in time. Well, look at that. We were actually positive a month ago, suggesting that, well, if anything, the active phase of the MJO is lowering pressure in the Pacific. The 90-day average is your El Nino La Nina indicator, minus 3.79. I mean, if we were in El Nino, this would be down at minus 15 or 20 or something. Where was it a month ago? We're actually lower now. It's actually like, okay, we're supposed to be moving into La Nina, but it feels like El Nino is still not quite giving up the ghost. Let's look at a chart. Here is the 30-day SOI graphed out. So you can see here was our La Nina back in 2022 as we got into 2023. Massive atmospheric rivers driven by the active phase of the MJO, the run-up to El Nino. And then in June, everything just kind of stalled out. El Nino really never got its footing back. It looked like it was all over in January. But here's where we are today, still just hovering. You know, if you sort of draw, well, here is our upward trend, but lately it seems we've stalled at about the minus 3 range and are holding there, which is effectively neutral. So we're not El Nino. The atmosphere doesn't think we're El Nino, but the atmosphere doesn't think we're La Nina either. Just hovering somewhere around neutral. What's the forecast suggest? Here's the sea surface temperature forecast for the Nino 3.4 region, the official El Nino monitoring region from the CFS version 2 model. All right, so here's actuals. Here's a peak of our El Nino back in December with water temperatures right at about 2 degrees. You see steadily falling temperatures as of today. This would be mid-June, right at 0. The forecast says temperatures falling to minus a tenth of a degree as we get into mid-July. Well, that's still almost a month away. But then precipitously falling down to right at about 1.1 degrees. Now, we're out of the spring unpredictability barrier. That's good news. This very same model 3 or 4 months ago showed temperatures down at minus 2.2. Almost, not each run of the model, but every week or two, this thing keeps ticking up and hovering right around the 1 degree mark. And this is the more outrageous of these two versions of this model. Here is the moderated, the PDF corrected version. It shows temperatures now not even at 1 degree below normal, 0.9. So half degree to 1 degree below normal is a weak La Nina. This shows weak La Nina. This shows right at a weak to just barely a modest La Nina. This is interesting. The model steadily is suggesting the strength of this La Nina getting weaker and weaker. Let's go look at what some other models are saying. Right, here is the latest consensus or consolidated every El Nino model there is. The dynamic models here, they're all listed. The CFS is, where is it? It's buried in here somewhere. There it is, right there. Okay, it is the coldest of all these models, or very close. The statistic models, they're all listed here, what, total of 30 different models or something like that. All right, let's go drive into the actual numbers here. The dynamic models. Let's just look at the average of all the dynamic models now showing temperatures. I think this was showing minus 0.9 a month ago. This updates once a month. Now showing 0.752 in the November, December, January time frame. The statistic models are showing minus 0.565, not even barely La Nina territory. Half to a 1 degree is considered weak La Nina. The average of all models, 0.653, just barely La Nina. That coupled with that little building warm trend that's happening over in the West Pacific, and just the steady, the models aggressively saying that we're going into La Nina and now just backing off and backing off and backing off, sort of hints that maybe we're not in as bad a shape as we thought we were even 2 months ago. All right, so let's wrap this up. First, let's get out of the trees and take a big, broad overview. What's coming for the next week? There's swell hitting California. It's really small right now. It's basically flat up north, mainly because of the tide. But down south, Southern California, there's fun-sized rideable surf at select locations. That swell to build into Monday and then slowly start trickling down through the middle of the work week. But the models are suggesting another 2 systems pushing their way across the South Pacific as we get later into the week. I think it's later in the week. The first one more of a primer system, though there will be swell from that, and stronger, more southerly angled swell from the second of the 2 systems, so we have something to look forward to. Beyond that, well, maybe there's hope. We're in the inactive, or right about to go into the inactive phase of the MJO for a week or so, then supposedly the active phase after that. Now, what's mostly encouraging is the consensus model and even the CFS model itself steadily indicating the strength of the coming La Nina for this fall and winter, looking weaker and weaker and weaker. Certainly not moving back into El Nino territory, but it's interesting. Our El Nino, based on last week's dissection of all the data, suggested that our El Nino was not nearly as strong as we thought it would be, given that there was high pressure and the PDO was in play. That said, now it seems like if the pendulum swang not as far as we thought to the left towards El Nino, and now it's swinging back to La Nina, the stronger the El Nino is, the more the reaction is the other way towards La Nina. The silver lining is our El Nino wasn't as strong, but the good news is the counter reaction to it, the coming La Nina, probably won't be as strong either. We'll see how this all plays out. It's still only June and we have a couple of months to go, but fingers crossed, maybe this next coming winter won't be as bad as we maybe thought, and maybe the lingering energy from this existing El Nino will continue into the fall and winter and maybe give us a little bit better than what than a typical La Nina type winter. So we'll just have to see how that plays out. All right, that's the forecast for this week. If you enjoyed it, give us a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed, click the Stormsurf icon down in the lower right-hand corner of your screen. If you'd like to make a contribution, you may just hit the super thanks button down below, the heart with the $sign in it. And of note, there will not be a video next week. No video next week. There's some things going on that I need to deal with, but after that, we'll be back in business again as usual. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you in 2 weeks. Thanks again.